evening. Let's go ahead and get started. Hi, Tai. Welcome to our roundtable discussion this afternoon, Okinawa Subnational Diplomacy, Promoting Cooperation and Preventing Conflict in East Asia, hosted jointly by the Okinawa Prefectural Government DC office, the Okinawa Collection at GW Libraries and Academic Innovation, the Seeger Center, and the East Asia National Resource Center. My name is Kristen Luck, the librarian for the Okinawa Collection here at GW, and I will be your MC today. We're delighted that you're able to join us here in person and online. And we were going to have an engaging schedule with remarkable experts, and we're going to go ahead and dive in. Just a quick tech note, if you need translation services, you need to listen to a dub in English. You're going to use the simultaneous translation. It's the side button, press English. Make sure your mic is muted, and then put your earpiece on. If you speak Japanese, you will not need to use the interpretation device. I would like to invite Dean Geneva Henry from Libraries and Academic Innovation, followed by Professor Celeste Arrington, co-director of the East Asia National Resource Center and director of the Asian Studies Program, to deliver welcome remarks. Please, Dean Henry.
Thank you, Kristen, and welcome back, Governor. It's always a pleasure to have you. We've had this relationship with the Okinawa Prefectural Government for about 9 years, where we have been beneficiaries of a wonderful collection on Okinawa. Today, we're going to talk about the relationships, I believe, between Okinawa, the United States, and what's going on the world stage. It's important for us to remember, and we're very cognizant of the fact that our presence as Americans in Okinawa needs to demonstrate the respect for the Okinawa people, for the Okinawa culture. I'm pleased that we have the resources at Gelman Library and our Global Resources Center to make available to our community and to the wider community the materials that help to talk about that culture, that people, the history, and what makes this such a special relationship. So I'm pleased that we can continue this on each year, growing that collection and growing that knowledge base. So thank you for allowing me this opportunity to provide a welcome to all of you during this, what will be a very interesting discussion. And again, welcome back, Governor. It's always good to see you.
Good evening, and on behalf of the East Asia National Resources Center, which I co-direct, I'd like to welcome Governor Tamaki back from Okinawa. I am also the director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies and the GWIX, as we like to call it, along with the Seeger Center for Asian Studies, established in 2018, the East Asia National Resources Center with a grant from the Department of Education. And I think one of the main reasons that we were awarded this large grant is the really unique Okinawa collection and the long history of Asian studies at GW, which Okinawa kind of stands out as a gem in that crown. And so it's my great pleasure to hear from the governor today and to welcome you back. Part of the East Asia National Resources Center mission is not just to promote Asian studies, as well as language study and area studies, including about Okinawa here among our students at GW, I think many of whom are in the room, but also to reach out to the K through 12 community in the greater DC area, to have outreach programs to minority serving institutions, and to the broader community. And I think the Okinawa Collection is a great partner of the East Asia National Resources Center in this enterprise. And so on behalf of the Seeger Center, as well as the East Asia National Resources Center, I want to extend a great welcome and hope that you will all benefit from today's discussion, as I'm sure we will hear a lot of interesting things today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Henry and Professor Arrington, for your kind remarks. With that, I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Professor Mike Mochizuki, the Japan-US Relations Associate Professor for Political Science and International Affairs here at the Elliott School. Professor Mochizuki.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great personal pleasure to welcome Governor Tamaki back to George Washington University, and also an honor, personal honor for me to introduce him. Governor Tamaki started his political career in the Okinawa City Council, where he was a member from 2002 to 2005. And then in 2009, he was elected to Japan's House of Representatives, where he served until 2018. And while he was a member of the House of Representatives, he was on the House Standing Committee on National Security and was a director of the House Special Committee on Okinawa and Northern Territories Affairs. In 2018, Governor Tamaki ran successfully in Okinawa's gubernatorial election, and he was reelected as governor of Okinawa in 2022. Now, in addition to these highlights of his political career, I thought I would take a moment to say a few other things about Governor Tamaki that may not be known to some of you. Before entering politics, Governor Tamaki was a very popular radio disc jockey in Okinawa. And I think he created the fan base for him to launch his political career. He is an accomplished singer, songwriter, and guitarist, and he had a very successful rock band. And then after getting elected as governor in 2018, he began to learn karate at the age of 59. And as many of you know, karate has its historical roots in Okinawa. And he has used karate as one of the elements of Okinawa's soft power as part of his subnational diplomacy initiative. Now, because I had a class I couldn't attend yesterday, but I understand at a reception in Washington, D.C., Governor Tamaki demonstrated his formidable singing and karate skills. So please join me in welcoming Governor Tamaki.
アリサイグスヨ中がなみら。Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Denny Tamaki, Governor of Okinawa Prefecture. And thank you very much for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak to you today. My English is not perfect, but I will do my best to deliver my message. よろしくお願いいたします。Okay, before I begin, I would like to talk about the security environment surrounding Okinawa and our unique efforts in subnational diplomacy. I would appreciate it if you could all share your thoughts and advice with me. As you are all aware, there are some Okay, thank you. Okay, again. As you are all aware, there are some challenges that exist in Okinawa regarding US military bases. Okinawa only makes up about 0.6% of Japan's land area, but 70.3% of the facilities exclusively used by the American military forces are concentrated on our small island. In addition, about 15% of the landmass of Okinawa's main island, where more than 90% of Okinawa's population lives, is occupied by American military bases. I have to point out that the concentration of US military bases on our small island is the reason why various base-related incidents and accidents, noise pollution, and environmental problems are happening in Okinawa. Last December, a US Air Force serviceman on Okinawa committed an incident kidnapping and non-consensual sexual intercourse with a minor. Dismay, an incident of non-consensual sexual intercourse with a woman resulting in injury was committed by a US Marine Corps serviceman on Okinawa. However, these events were only recently revealed. The fact that such shocking crimes were committed by US servicemen itself is disturbing, but in addition, the reporting system that was agreed upon by the Japan-US Joint Committee after the assault in 1995 did not function at all this time. Furthermore, last week, on September 5th, it was revealed that another case of sexual assault against a woman had occurred in June. This is outrageous and out of question. I am responsible for the safety and security of my citizens. Why did the reporting systems fail to function? How can we build a relationship of trust between the US forces in Japan, the Japanese government, and Okinawa Prefecture? I sincerely hope we can discuss this today when we exchange views later. There have also been many of the incidents and accidents over the years, including the one in August 2004, when a helicopter from USM Shiftenma crashed into a nearby university. Also, the aircraft noise from Kadena Air Base and Futenma Air Station, which are American bases located close to residential areas, have a major impact on the living environment of the local residents on a daily basis. Furthermore, we have witnessed in recent years that PFAS, a type of chemical compound that is subject to international regulations, has been detected in the rivers and spring water around the bases, which has become a major environmental problem on our island. I believe that both the Japanese and US governments should urgently address matters related to the safety and security of the people, including which side bears the cost. I would also like to talk about our biggest remaining issue, which is the relocation of Futenma Air Station. I have heard some argue that this case has been settled in the Japanese court. But no, I do not agree. The technical issues have not been thoroughly reviewed and resolved at all. For example, the Japanese government plans to reclaim the Henoko Sea areas to build a runway. But despite the existence of a soft seabed that makes it risky to build a runway 3. Sufficient geologically inspections have not been conducted. Some experts have indicated that there is the possibility of the seawall collapsing and the risk of ground subsidence of the runway. Normally, the maintenance costs of the U.S. military facilities would be borne by the U.S. side. Therefore, perhaps I would like to suggest the U.S. congressional members and all U.S. taxpayers to pay attention to this issue. Please let me first clarify that I understand the necessity of the alliance between Japan and the United States. I also understand the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and I believe that there should be no attempt to change the status quo by force. And to maintain the peace and stability in East Asia, the Japan-US security framework needs to be managed in a stable manner. And for that to happen, the understanding of local communities that host bases of the US military and self-defense forces is essential. To that end, I believe that it is important to have as many opportunities as possible to have discussion and dialogue between Tokyo, Washington, and Okinawa. In Okinawa, new units of the self-defense forces are being deployed, and Japan-US joint exercises such as Resolute Dragon and Keen Sword are being conducted. However, I must point out that both Tokyo and Washington have failed to provide sufficient justification and information about their security policies to gain the understanding of the local communities. As Japan and the US have deepened their alliance, deterrence is being reinforced. In addition, Japan formulated a new national security strategy in December 2022 and decided to possess a contract capability which counterattack capability, which Japan had never possessed in the past, marking a major shift in its national security policy. In order for such deterrence to function properly without a security dilemma, I believe it is necessary to ease tensions and build trust through dialogue. Only when these elements function as two sides of the same coin can well be prevented. The Defense of Japan 2023 edict issued by the Japanese government also states that it is important to maintain and strengthen communication through dialogue, even with those who have different views, and to aim toward building trust to avoid unforeseen situations. Okinawa Prefecture believes that it also needs to contribute to easing tensions and building trust. Therefore, this March, Okinawa Prefecture formulated the Okinawa Prefecture Basic Policy on Subnational Diplomacy. This basic diplomacy aims to establish Okinawa to become a hub for creating international peace, co-creation of global business, and contribution towards international cooperation through the promotion of subnational diplomacy. We will never forget the historical fact that our island's history, nature, and landscapes were destroyed and sacrificed in the conflict between nations. We remember this not with anger or resentment, but as a lesson. As a citizen living in the Asia-Pacific region, we must have the strong determination to earnestly engage in peaceful diplomacy and dialogue with neighboring countries to prevent war and the tragedies of our history from happening again. I hope that all of you here today share the similar views towards peace as Okinawa, and that you will share your views throughout the United States. I believe that its intentions in building trust through peaceful diplomacy and dialogue is the direction that the international communities should take. With that in mind, I have strived to practice regional diplomacy with neighboring countries as a part of my responsibilities as a governor of a Japanese prefecture. In 2023, for example, I visited China as a member of the Japan-China Trade Promotion Mission and had an opportunity to meet with Premier Li Qiang. In that meeting, I mentioned the following 3 points. First, Okinawa was known as the bridge between the nations we called Bangkok Shinryo during the Ryukyu Kingdom era, prospering through peaceful exchanges with China and other Asian countries. Second, because of the tragic history of the Battle of Okinawa, we strongly believe that life is precious, and that is why we are proactively promotion the Okinawan spirit of peace, both at home and abroad. And third, Okinawa countries to maintain the spirit of the bridge between the nations and hopes to promote friendly relations between Japan and China and to contribute to the lasting peace and prosperity of the Asian region. In addition, Okinawa Prefecture participates every year in the Island Tourism Policy Forum called ITOP, where local governments from island regions in Asia, such as Jeju Island of South Korea and Hainan province of China, hold a dialogue to find solutions to common issues related to island tourism. Okinawa Prefecture will also participate in the Association of Northeast Asia Regional Governments we call NEAR, which brings together 81 local governments from 6 countries: Japan, China, South Korea, Mongolia, Russia, and North Korea, to work together on global issues. I am the head of the small local government, but I would like to work sincerely to contribute to peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region. Next year commemorates the 80th year since the end of World War II. It is my earnest hope that people in the Asia-Pacific region will continue to build face-to-face exchanges in business, culture, and human resources, and to engage in grassroots international contribution activities. And I truly hope that even a small local government like Okinawa can contribute to the efforts to ease regional tensions and build relationship of trust. As I mentioned earlier, I will strive to do my best as the governor of Okinawa Prefecture. I would greatly appreciate your understanding and would like to seek for your opinion on how U.S. could possibility cooperate together with Okinawa Prefecture's initiatives. Finally, I would like to continue to have a series of conversations such as today's dialogue between Okinawa and Washington, together with the expert from GW, American think tanks, and universities, both through in-person and virtual formats in the future. Amid the rapidly changing international situation, I would like to continue to not only deliver the voices of the people of Okinawa, but also to deepen our discussion on sustainable security and peace in the regions with those here today and with many others. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor Tamaki. You've given us a lot of food for thought. And so I want to now turn to the second half of our program to a roundtable discussion. And so I'd like to invite Dr. Sheila Smith and Dr. Jennifer Kavanaugh to join the governor up front. And maybe we can take a seat here. Okay, well, first, let me start by introducing our two panelists, and we're really fortunate to have such prominent experts. To my immediate left is Dr. Sheila Smith, who is the John Moreau Senior Fellow for Asian Pacific Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. She has authored many terrific books. They include Japan Rearmed, The Politics of Military Power, Intimate Rivals, Japanese Domestic Politics and a Rising China in Japan's New Politics and the U.S.-Japan Alliance. And she is also chair of the Japan-U.S. Friendship Commission and the U.S. advisors to the UN U.S.-Japan Conference on Cultural and Educational Interchange. And to my far left is Dr. Jennifer Kavanaugh, who is Senior Fellow and Director of Military Analysis at Defense Priorities. She focuses on the study of U.S. military strategy, force structure, defense budgeting, the defense industrial base, and U.S. military interventions. She was previously a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and also worked as a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation, where she served as director of RAND's Army Strategy Program. And she has written a number of very important pieces that take a critical look at U.S. military force posture overseas. So we're delighted to have both of them joining us for this round table. So I thought I'd first turn to you, Sheila, and I want you to give your comments and thoughts to Governor Tamaki's initial remarks. But also, I thought it would be great if you could focus on a couple of things. One, my understanding is that both the United States and Japan has been recently also emphasizing subnational diplomacy. And so, given that, I was wondering, how you would see the way Okinawa's subnational diplomacy fits in. Does it align with the U.S. and Japanese subnational diplomacy? Is it at odds with that, or are they complementary? And then secondly, I can't resist asking this question because you've been, I know you've been studying the issue of US bases in Okinawa for a very long time. It must be more than a quarter of a century. Yes, it's been a long time. And yeah, yes, and you know, we're only still in our 20s, right? But and you did path breaking work on comparing kind of the U.S. Military bases in South Korea, Philippines, and Japan and Okinawa. And at the beginning of Governor Tamaki's remarks, he pointed out to some of the many issues that continue to cause frictions with Okinawa. And so, you know, given your kind of historical experience, I mean, has there been much progress in this, or has been progress been so slow, and how would you explain that?
Just two quick questions, right, Mike? First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to see so many students from GW and from other schools around town in the audience. This is a great conversation, and Governor Tamaki, thank you also for a terrific presentation. I haven't seen the governor since before the pandemic, so it's a wonderful opportunity for me to catch up on what's happening in Okinawa. So, Mike, let me talk a little bit about the subnational diplomacy, because it's a kind of awkward word. You know, it's in English anyway, maybe in Japanese it's better. But I just stepped down as chair of the U.S. panel of COLCON, which Mike kindly introduced, which is really to help the people of Japan and the United States find ways of communicating, building relationships, educating younger people, bringing you into the U.S.-Japan partnership, all kinds of activities. So very much about our soft power relationship, the bilateral soft power relationship. And one of the working groups that's just about wrapping up its work is on subnational diplomacy. Both Tokyo and Washington, the national governments, are very focused on making sure the foundations of this partnership are deep and strong, and generations are changing. So we want young people to come into this space and to give support if we can. So that's a sort of national view of this. What I think is so fascinating, and I'm borrowing here on the scholarly work of Mary Alice Haddad. Some of you know, a Japan scholar at Wesleyan University. She has done extensive sort of data collection and analysis of how subnational links, not just US-Japan, but also Japan and other parts of Asia, have become really front runners and front burner kind of places for problem solving. And it goes obviously between, you know, exchanges, the kind of exchanges that the governor participated in, but also energy, environmental issues, thinking about climate change, how to adapt, right? And I think the governor's example of Okinawa's identity as an island and its particular kinds of challenges that it shares with Jeju in South Korea, Hainan Island in China, and I would imagine Taiwan as well. But even beyond the Northeast Asia, this is an area where Okinawa has an awful lot to offer in terms of skills, best practices, but also just reaching out to build bridges of thinking of new ideas and how to solve these kinds of problems. So subnational diplomacy may be a slightly awkward word in English, but it's really a little bit of a front where the interesting work is being done in the region. And it's not necessarily always being done by diplomats and statespersons at the national level. It's really being done at the level of prefecture or city. So the problem solving aspect of this is really quite fascinating. I do think that the geography matters for Okinawa. You are positioned certainly in the middle of geopolitical tensions at the moment, but you're also positioned at the edge of the East China Sea and the South China Sea, where a lot of the kind of challenges that we noted in the environment and elsewhere really need to be addressed. Disaster relief, for example, really need to be addressed. People's lives are at stake. And so I think it's a very rich area. So I printed out your new strategy. My Japanese is a little rusty, so I didn't get to memorize all of it before I came, but it really does develop a strategy along these lines of problem solving with other partners. And I think it's very, very in tune with what Tokyo would like to see, but also what Washington would like to see as well. The dissonance, and that's really where you wanted me to also include, the dissonance where I feel here is going to be on the base issues specifically. And that has long been the challenge, I think, for the governor, is to figure out how to get the US-Japan coordination mechanisms to fully understand the situation in Okinawa, but also to be responsive to the demands for information, for problem solving, for fixing environmental damage issues and other kinds of issues. That, I think, is something, and I think the governor obviously feels the same, but it's something that I think the policymakers here in Washington and in the policymakers in Tokyo can spend more time figuring out what has gone wrong. I'm not saying that these mechanisms and processes that have been established don't work, but they obviously don't work to the satisfaction of the local residents. So there's still work to be done and accountability to be had. If these recent issues, sorry, my thingy here is falling off. If these recent issues of sexual violence do not have a framework that includes local prefectural police, for example, in the informational exchange of, that's a problem. If the breakdown is at the prefectural level between the police and the governor's office, that's something we need to know as well. So I think there's different places here where there's certainly more work, obviously, that needs to be done. If I may, on the base issue you mentioned, thank you, Mike, you mentioned the report I did while I was at the East West Center, and which it was called Shifting Terrain, and I compared Korea, the Philippines, which at the time, of course, Mindanao was the focal point in the Bush administration's war on terror, and obviously Okinawa. I think it's very hard and very unusual for national policymakers to take the point of view of the local communities. They see them as peripheral. They see them as places to locate military forces due to their strategic location, but they don't always get the benefit of the kind of perspective that the governor and I would say also municipal leaders have to advocate for. I wrote a very small piece at the time looking at local actors and national policies. It was an edited volume. We looked at a lot of different issues. I concentrated on the base issue because for me, it was a very interesting evolution of Japanese local governance, right? In that governors were elected by the people of Okinawa, and yet they still were expected to play a role in national administrative policies and procedures. And for those of you who don't study at the micro level what this means, at a certain point, the governors had to sign off on the leases for the bases. The governors had to sign off on and still do, I believe, but the governor will correct me if I'm wrong, on environmental inspections, right? And they are responsible to ministries, bureaucracies in Tokyo for providing the sign off and the informational flow in that direction. The other side from Tokyo to Okinawa is not quite as accountable under Japanese administrative practice. And I think therein lies one of the pieces of the puzzle for leaving aside the sexual violence cases, but the environmental cases that the governor raised and some of the other problem solving with regard to obviously to Hinoko and the geological surveys and things like that. It is a one-way informational flow, usually from Tokyo to the prefecture, and very, very dimmed information flow or very hard information flow the other way around. And that's where I think, I'm not prescribing a solution here, but I wanted to point this out that it's not just a US-Japan challenge to get the right procedures and mechanisms in place. It's also a domestic Japanese political challenge as well.
Thank you very much, Sheila. So I wanted to give an opportunity for Governor Tamaki to react on Sheila's comments. But I also wanted to highlight a proposal that I think the governor made some years ago, which is to try to get Okinawa to have a seat at the table. And I think you propose, Governor, a special action committee on Okinawa with Okinawa, so that Okinawa would really be a part of this. And I was just wondering to what extent there was any support for that idea, Governor Tamaki. And then the other thing is that if it's Okinawa in dialogue with Japan, the Japanese government, given the administrative structure, which is quite hierarchical, it really puts Okinawa at a disadvantage. But there's also another path And this is kind of deriving from my good friend Richard Samuels's notion of extra horizontal, extra local linkages. One way, because there are a lot of other prefectures in Japan that face similar problems, environmental problems. To what extent has Okinawa been working with other prefectural governments and governors to try to create a more collective response so that their voices, these local voices, are heard more at the national government. So Governor Tamaki, if you could comment on that, that would be great.
Miss Professor Sheila, thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that you have not forgotten about my my comment. So you see, Sheila has not forgotten that I have been dealing with the Okinawa-based issues since I was the member of the House of Representatives, and she has been providing me advice since then. And then at the same time, and between the Japanese and US government, to what extent the local government can be involved? This is a really difficult issues, and then she has given me a lot of advice on that. Now, with the base issue, when it comes to this kind of significant issue, this has to do with US and Japan, and also a relationship with Japan and other countries as well. So it is very hard to change the dynamics of that all at the same time. So in Okinawa, there are certain things that Okinawa need to really formalize our thoughts and our positions to talk to the central government. And this is our rights as a local government. So as a matter of fact, for that in 1997, there was something that was put together from Kadena Airport. There was a plan to relocate to the south of the Kadena. It's Okinawa. There was a special committee established for that, and then so there were several questions and proposals that we have been making since then. Now there's a SACO agreement. Now there is a agreement between US and Japan, US and Japanese. It's a bilateral agreement and has been implemented. Now, in that picture, Okinawa Prefecture or the Okinawa communities to participate in that discussion, to talk about what kind of time frame we need to accept, to what extent we need to cooperate. That is a type of discussion that we were not being able to participate in. And so even if all the agreements have been implemented and completed, it was sort of forced, it was sort of made so that things will be made in Okinawa without really consulting with Okinawa. You see, there really is just there is not a lot of reduction of the base land size in Okinawa as a whole. It is still 69% is in Okinawa's burden. So this is not contributing to what Okinawa is trying to say to have. And so there is a notion that SACO second should start, and then at that seat we would like to have a table at that seat, not just US and Japanese government, but also the Okinawa government would like to send a representative and to participate in the discussion. This is something that I have been talking about. However, unfortunately, the Japanese government and American government and SACO second, there has been no movement to make that happen. So the SACO first even has just begun. It was put together in 1997, but since then, there are a lot of changes to the plans and the return of the base or the relocation plan. There have been many changes. Therefore, there really hasn't been a good environment to talk about Sakotu. And also, in terms of the Okinawa economy, health, welfare, especially during the COVID time, you see, we are an island prefecture. So once COVID entered in our island, we needed to protect ourselves so that we do not let that take over our island and so that nobody would lose their lives. And then we did make a proposal to the central government. And at that time, the central government was struggling how to deal with the COVID. But then eventually, the central government has decided to allocate funds to each local government, and that each local government was received equally. And then so that discussion was also debated very actively to make that happen. And then that voice was delivered to the Japanese central government, and that is how this consequence was led to. So there is a national Japanese local government conference body, and then we are also making different suggestions. Now we do have an idea that the SOFA agreement needs to be revised. Now, however, the reason of that has not been well communicated. So I have made the material and I have explained many times over. I was telling people this is not just the Okinawa problem. This is a problem that the whole nation of Japan shares with. So in terms of I'm not going to go into the details, but I really stress the importance of revising the SOFA agreement. And so that is how I voice my opinion, and the local government to all put our voices together. And then at times we are successful at changing the attitude of the central government. So my thought is that I am going to continue to broadcast that why are the U.S. bases concentrated in Okinawa Prefecture, and then and then I'm going to continue to broadcast that towards the rest of the nation. And when all of the Japanese local governments do work together, then I can make a change. So that is my belief. I think
Thank you very much, Governor. So now I want to turn to Jennifer, who has been studying very carefully U.S. military posture overseas. So the governor in his remarks kind of reminded us of the heavy concentration of U.S. military bases in Okinawa. And every time I go to Okinawa, I hear from residents of Okinawa that they are very concerned that because of the heavy concentration of U.S. bases and forces in Okinawa, and then also the buildup of the self-defense forces in the so-called Southwest Island chain, that Okinawa is becoming much more of a target, military target, if there is, God forbid, a military conflict between the United States and China involving Taiwan. And then I also hear, some military analysts saying that does it really make sense to have so much of the U.S. forces concentrated in Okinawa in Japan, because they could be vulnerable to a Chinese missile attack. And in fact, my understanding is that the U.S. Air Force has come up with a new concept called agile combat deployment that talks about dispersing air assets. So, given that, I was wondering what your view is regarding the U.S. military deployments in Okinawa and in Japan, and the relative importance of the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And my understanding is that the United States is now considering some other kind of build-up plans. So if you could comment on that as well as comment on the governor's remark, that would be wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, for including me and Governor as well for your great remarks. I'm really honored to be here today with all of you. So I'm going to take a little different spin on the military-based question, focusing not just on the area that's covered by military bases, which is the government said is about 70% of the island. It's also about 70% of U.S. bases in Japan are concentrated in Okinawa. But to talk a little bit about the trend lines in terms of the capabilities and the forces that are actually on the island. Oh. Okay, sneeze a little. The capabilities and the forces that are on the island and the implications, and then get to Mike's question about, is this actually protecting Japan? Is this actually deterring China? And what are alternatives? So right now there are about 30,000 or so U.S. military forces on Okinawa. It's about 60% of all U.S. military forces in Japan are concentrated on the island, and that doesn't include Department of Defense civilians or family members. So it's a big concentration of individuals. There is a plan to move about 9,000, about half of the U.S. Marines off of Okinawa over time. On a military timescale, who knows how long that will take? It's supposed to start in December, in theory. But that's still only about 10,000 people. So you're still, you still have a very high concentration of military personnel. But what matters a lot more, I think, are the capabilities, because that's what, when China looks at Okinawa and sees it as a potential threat, in terms of the U.S. military power, they're looking at the capabilities. So let me give you a few data points here. So as Mike mentioned, the Air Force has this new concept where they're trying to distribute their air capabilities more widely across the island. But there's a challenge here, which is that the U.S. actually doesn't have that many bases in the region where it can put aircraft. Unsurprisingly, not that many countries want to host U.S. military forces because it makes them a target of China. So the Air Force announced a plan about 2 years ago that they were going to move some of their older aircraft, their F-15s, out of Kadena and move them somewhere else. Because they're no longer combat capable or credible. They're old, they're easy to shoot down, they're not that effective. But while they've been doing that, and they've been very cagey about how quickly they're doing that, they've surged a lot of other air power into the theater. So F-22s, F-35s, F-16s. So at any one time at Kadena, you may actually have more air power than you had before with the F-15. And they haven't kept this a secret. They've announced all these deployments. A couple of, recently they did this, what's called an elephant walk, where they basically parade all their airplanes on the tarmac to show how much strength they have. And you can imagine how this looks from Beijing. It doesn't look like, a friendly show of fancy airplanes. So that's the Air Force. What about the Marines? Well, the Marines also have kind of revised their military strategy to be more agile and light, to operate better in coastal regions in the Pacific where they think they're going to be needed most. And the good news is that's meant that they've gotten rid of their tanks and a lot of their artillery. The bad news is they've replaced that with like lots of missiles, which they plan to use to shoot Chinese ships and airplanes as they try to get out of the first island chain to potentially affect power across the Pacific. So again, we see a surge of offensive capabilities. The other thing that the Marine Corps plans to do with their smaller force is they would really like to not just be concentrated on their bases, but to spread their forces out across the islands in southwestern Japan, which would mean more mingling of U.S. military personnel and civilian population if there were some kind of conflict in which China targeted Okinawa. That could potentially mean more civilian casualties, because you'd have military personnel kind of spread out and dispersed across the islands. So finally, the Army doesn't actually have that big a presence in Okinawa. They only actually have about 2,000 military personnel in all of Japan. They're mostly concentrated in Korea. But they'd like to change that. The Army Secretary announced, I think it was last week, that she and the rest of the military would really like to deploy their new mid-range capability, which is a platform that can shoot longer range missiles up to 1,500 miles, so easily reaching targets deep inside mainland China from Japan. They'd like to deploy that to the southwestern islands for exercises, so not necessarily to leave there permanently, but those exercises would potentially last up to 6 months. Now, this is the same thing that they did in the Philippines, where they left this capability in for about 6 months. It made China very nervous. It seems like their basic strategy is that they'd like to deploy these forward, leave them there for long periods of time, and if a conflict breaks out, that it's there, and they'll get permission to use it. Because using this in a conflict would require Japanese or Philippine government permission. So what we're seeing here is a surge of offensive combat capabilities into southwestern Japan, rather than the pullback that we might like to see if we're going to reduce the military presence and burden on Okinawa. So why do we see this? Well, the stated rationale is that the U.S. military is trying to protect Japan. The problem is that if you want to deter China and to harden and actually, make Japan and Okinawa a place that China doesn't want to attack, these aren't capabilities that you'd surge into southwestern Japan. Instead, you'd send lots of air defense so you could protect against Chinese missiles. You use naval mines and have them in storage so you could protect Japanese coast. You'd leave that artillery and the tanks there so you could build fortifications. You'd harden infrastructure. These aren't the things that the U.S. military is doing. Instead, they're focusing much more on offensive capabilities. So how do we explain this discrepancy? The best explanation, this buildup of capabilities isn't really focused on defending Japan, but in terms of the goal is, or the intention is to use it to project power if there were to be a conflict over Taiwan, because Okinawa is very strategically placed if there were to be a conflict over Taiwan. The problem here, of course, is this question of deterrence. The U.S. military is clearly living in a world where we have a deterrence model where, as they surge more hard power into the region, China is deterred from using military force. But China doesn't necessarily see it that way. There's already evidence that China is living much more in a spiral model, where the more military power the U.S. surges forward, the more insecure China feels, the more it escalates, the more the U.S. escalates, and so we get into this competing escalation. Why do I say that? Well, we've seen a significant increase in terms of Chinese incursions into Taiwanese airspace, into Japanese airspace, into Japanese waters, the economic zone, and increasingly aggressive activity, as well as towards the Philippines. And if you look at the timing, it's roughly about the time the U.S. really started to surge this combat capabilities. So can I prove causality? No. Does there seem to be a relation here between the U.S. buildup and escalating Chinese activity in these waters and airspace? Yes. So rather than helping to protect Japan, a lot of the U.S. military posture changes in the past few years, I think, have escalated tensions and made Japan and Okinawa less secure. So what's the solution here? Well, the solution, in my view, is kind of shift strategy, to surge forward not these offensive capabilities, certainly not the Army's mid-range capability, but to focus on these defensive capabilities, air defense, naval mines, hardened infrastructure, fortifications, alongside a real effort to lower tensions through diplomacy. And it probably also means pulling not only combat capabilities, but also military forces back from Okinawa and stationing them elsewhere in Japan. The U.S.-Japanese alliance is very important, and the U.S. is committed to defending Japan and supporting Japan in its defense, but it may not be able to do that as effectively in Okinawa as it could if it were based more widely across the island, as well as in places where it could defend itself better. As Mike alluded to, Okinawa is a very appealing target, with very few missiles, China could take out a lot of U.S. power in the region. So by distributing those forces back further, the military can leverage what's called defensive depth, basically allows a defender to take advantage of the benefits that come with being on the defense. And that would also help to address some of the problems the governor raised about the number of bases and the new bases being built, the environmental implications, and the burden that having such a large population of military members naturally imposes on a local population.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. So it seems that you've got a very sober and critical view of the trends of U.S. Military deployments, but it seems that the good news is that there is a solution that makes military sense that might also reduce the vulnerability and burden on Okinawa.
One thing I should say though is I do think it also requires a rethinking on the U.S. side of the approach to the question about Taiwan, and a real attempt to lower tensions with China over that, where in the past few administrations we've seen the opposite tendency with with Nancy Pelosi's visit, with some of the erosion of the way the administration talks about the one China policy, with Biden's statements that indicated that he would send troops to defend Taiwan, which goes against the sort of strategic ambiguity. So it would require political discipline to make this strategy work.
Thank you. Governor Tamaki, would you like to react or comment on Jennifer's points?
Thank you so much. The F-15, as this has really gotten much older, F and F-35, not so much of a solid deployment, but I hear that it is more of a tentative deployment. In other words, they will exercise using these aircrafts to a short amount of time. It might be F-35 or other aircrafts, but these are already starting. And just as you mentioned earlier, Marines, in terms of reducing and the size, and then they will be mobile in terms of their exercise. So that's the idea they have. So they have different bases from different areas and where they will fly their aircraft. So in other words, this is more of a mobile troops. This is the idea, or this is already starting. That plan has already started to be implemented. So in any case, from the perspective of the Japanese people, towards these strategy that the U.S. military is implement, thus far, Japan has formulated this defense exclusive policy as its basic defense policy. Now, this is at the core. From this kind of a defense, mainly defense policy, in order to face these different contingency, like there are different joint exercises, like key resolution or others, and then so what this really means is there are Miyako and Ishigaki, other islands in the southwest part of Japan. This is really the exercises have really expanded to other areas in Japan. So this is done so that the U.S. military force can be really mobile, but also the Japanese self-defense force also will go together and to have a very active information sharing. This is something that can contribute. This actually contributes to the heightened tension in the people or the community in Okinawa. So this is actually going backwards in terms of easing the tension. So from the Okinawa's perspective, at least, I believe it was 2000, maybe 2006, perhaps. The first, it was prior to the first Abe administration. At that time, there was a notion that Japan will stick to the defense-only posture under the Japanese constitution. However, under the first Abe administration, in various ways, they have started its new direction to work more with the U.S. government. And then, so since then, the Japanese government, not so much based on its movement on the constitution, but rather to move towards a more of a cooperative policy with the United States. That is really the environment in which the U.S. military is expanding its deployment, which causes the Okinawa people to heighten its concerns. And you see, Okinawa is geographically close from China or Russia or North Korea. So, our thought is that we must reformulate strategies to deal with these neighboring countries. And we must come up with our the rest of the framework as our defense capabilities. And so, and we must build our military preparedness. And then, when China does something that provokes us or the rest of the world, then the Japan can increase its budget, its defense budget. I feel like this picture is actually making us more concerned about in the context of peace in this world. So we must, rather than going to that direction, why don't we build more trust? Why don't we try to make more effort to ease our tension and to cooperate with other countries? This is a type of strategy that I think need to
Thank you
have.
very much, Governor Tamaki. So I think your point about the importance of dialogue and diplomacy dovetails with Jennifer's last point. Now, I see that we're pretty much out of time, but I thought that we can extend this program a little bit more. So I want to open it up to questions, and I think we have time for kind of 2 questions from here, and then Kristen. I don't know if there are any no questions. Okay, so yes, I think you had your hand up. So you can go first, and let's see, in the back. And so if you can state your name and affiliation, and then ask the question.
Right, thank you very much. I'm Hun Chan-jung. I'm an undergraduate student at Georgetown University. So as a student from South Korea, I wholeheartedly sympathize and empathize with the people of Okinawa, as South Korea has the exact same issues concerning the US bases, and it shares the same type of tragic history due to geopolitics. Now I have a question about geopolitics. The closest neighboring capital city in East Asia from Okinawa's Naha nor Taiwan's Taipei is neither Tokyo nor Beijing. It is the case Seoul. A flight from Osan Air Base to the region will take half as long as a flight from Yokota. With that being said, shouldn't there be more cooperation among Seoul, Naha, and Tokyo to cope with bitter geopolitics as a regional middle power coalition? Thank you very much.
So it's addressed to Governor or
Professor.
Yes. Well, so I think the essence of the question is that given some of the common issues regarding bases and the possibility of conflict, shouldn't there be more cooperation between Japan and South Korea? So anybody want to address that?
You're looking at me. Governor might want to
Yeah.
But you want me to? Okay, I'm happy to jump in and then turn the mic to the governor. Very clearly, the United States, Japan, and South Korea have moved in the direction, right, of closer trilateral cooperation. When the governor was referencing Keen Sword, I was thinking of the trilateral exercise that we just saw in June between the U.S. and South Korea and Japan. I don't know to date that the governments have had conversations about basing issues. I don't know to date if the governments would align on base management policies, but certainly Tokyo and Seoul have a lot to talk about in terms of how they deal with changes in the American forward deployment of forces and what kind of strategic assets they might want in the region or not want in the region. In fact, President Yoon came to Washington for precisely that kind of conversation on extended deterrence last year. So I think there's a bilateral alliance to ally to ally conversation with the United States, but not to my knowledge, a trilateralized conversation on force deployments. So that's just an observation at this point. But I think if I heard you correctly, really you want Okinawa to be part of the conversation about base management challenges. Is that the right understanding?
As a regional middle power coalition, I read Professor Mochi's paper.
Right. So I think that's Governor Tamaki's part of the question there.
はい、確かに、
This bilateral and multilateral
collaboration. Depending on the country, what kind of point based on the discussion between what area we need to focus on. The national relationship has to be up to the government. However, NIA that I mentioned in my remarks, it's a 81 local government from the 6 countries. 81 organizations are participating in that island relationship. And this is what Okinawa is participating, collaborating the region to region. And if we increase the area, rather than making agreement between the nations, we can reach the goal from the regional standpoint. So the security of the human is also a food chain and also a security issue. It's all related. So if at national level it's hard to have a relationship, then the regional relationship might be quicker to establish, and agreement from the local residents is might be easier to be reached.
I had just one thought. In our conversation, we talked about local governments and national governments, but we haven't actually talked a lot about civil society. And I think it's important that we consider the civil society piece in this for exactly the kind of example that the governor has been talking about. So I would say that, just to add to my earlier comment, the place where you see Okinawans talking to folks in Pyeongtaek or Tongducheon, but mostly Pyeongtaek, right, was around the reorganization of U.S. military bases. And it was the local governments talking to each other, learning Korean local government in Pyeongtaek, learning from Okinawan local government experience with the presence. You had women's groups who were talking about problems of sexual violence and other particular problems for women of military bases in the proximity of their communities. And you also had people who are interested in land expropriation issues, farmers in Pyeongtaek, et cetera. So I think the civil society transnational conversation is actually quite rich. I just wanted to point that out.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists. I'm a journalist from China's Caixin Media. I'm the US correspondent. My question is addressed to Governor Tamaki and Ms. Kanawa. So how would you describe a vision, Okinawa people's vision of a safe West Pacific? And also my second question is, how worried are you that the current trend of deepening security cooperation between Japan and the United States will continue infinitely and boundlessly? And what are the dangerous sides of this trend? Thank you.
You want to start, Jennifer?
I'll start. I can't speak to the Okinawan people's vision. That's a better question for the governor. But no, I don't think that cooperation in and of itself is a bad thing. I mean, that's the purpose of an alliance, is to build cooperation. It's more the focus of that cooperation, what they're doing and why they're doing it. Military exercises can be useful when they're helping to prepare for specific types of activities. And in my view, the goal of the U.S.-Japan alliance should be to defend Japan. That's the purpose of the alliance. Right now, a lot of the activities are focused more on proving that the U.S. can project power into the region in a way that is perceived as threatening by many in China. And as I said before, from the U.S. perspective, it's about deterrence, but from China's perspective, it comes across as threatening. And that then leads to kind of this escalation spiral that can have dangerous consequences, because it doesn't take a lot for miscalculations, especially in a case like U.S.-China, where the defense communications are very weak. It's getting better, but they're still very weak. So for me, it's less about, infinitely increasing cooperation, more about what they're doing. I would be less worried about improvements in or investment in US bases and Japanese bases in Okinawa if it was focused on building aircraft shelters so the aircrafts are protected and hardening ports, reinforcing air defenses and sensors and things that can help with warning. Like every country has the right to defend itself, and those are the types of investments that I would see as protecting Japan. I'm much more concerned about the types of cooperation that seem to be pushing towards an offensive use of power in the region. That's the military, for better or for worse, thinks in offensive terms. So I am concerned that they're going to keep pushing in that direction because that's sort of their natural tendency. And there are an increasing number of voices in Washington, D.C. that are trying to push in the opposite direction and make the case for a different type of use of military power abroad that has a lot higher bar for use of force and focuses on defensive capabilities and using more restraint in U.S. foreign policy, but that community is still pretty small. We keep working and hopefully we will gain numbers.
Yeah, this emphasis on the defensive rather than offensive seems to me much more consistent with the Japanese kind of venerable doctrine of senshuboi, the strictly defensive defense strategy. Okay, Governor Tamaki.
Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, the military force is only countered by military force. As we heighten force, then they will come back with another military force. So the deterrence is only, it's a principle of military force. As we were discussing earlier, if we go beyond certain point, it will go overboard and it will be uncontrollable. And how to prevent those overboard. That's why we need a peaceful diplomacy with our counterparts. We do not do anything to threaten the peace and stability of the East Asia. That's what we need to convey. And how that's possible within US-Japan alliance, I'm not sure. The white paper of defense in 2008, in this document, even if we don't have the same view, we need to keep on talking and discussing to avoid what we don't anticipate, to keep on doing what we can will lead to as a stability and security of the region. And we will have to approach to the other side. That's what we are striving for. And we need to collaborate. But Japan can do not only that, but what other country can collaborate with Japan. And I think that's quite effective.
Thank you, Governor Tamaki. I think we're just getting started, but unfortunately, we've run out of time. And so I think this is a good place to end this event with Governor Tamaki's very positive point. But I think you've demonstrated that we need to continue this conversation. So I hope we will be able to realize this, your proposal of an ongoing dialogue between Okinawa and Washington. So I want to thank Jennifer and Sheila and the governor for participating in this event. And I want to thank all of you for coming, your attention, and your terrific questions. So please join me in thanking the panel.